Okay, so you've heard it, language is very important. And we also know the brain is very important. I'd like to start out by telling you a little bit about how languages reproduce. They, like humans, they have ancestry and they have descendants. But unlike humans, they don't involve two parents. There's only mommies. So Spanish has a history of ancestors that goes, as far as we can document, at least 5,000 BC to something called Indo-European. That splits up into a lot of different branches. One of the branches is called Italic. That doesn't mean that people spoke in little cursive words, but it does mean that it also had descendants, and among them was Latin. And the Latin that we're concerned with is not the classical Latin of literature, but rather the Latin that you would hear on the Roman streets. And that spreads, of course, with Roman power. Roman power reached the Iberian Peninsula, which is now occupied by Portugal and Spain, and other little chunks like Andorra, if you've ever heard of that. At any rate, the language that you would hear on the street is what the legionnaires, the merchants, etc. would bring to the peninsula. And yet, the peninsula wasn't empty. There were what we might call indigenous peoples there, lots of different tribes with lots of different languages that have since been swamped out, except for one. Anybody remember which one that might be? Basque, exactly, I heard you. So Basque is a remnant, a vestige of a pre-Roman Spain that, and of course France, which spills over into the Pyrenees, that has an imprint on the evolving languages of the peninsula that come from Latin. One of them would probably never have become the third-ranked language in the world as it is today had it not been for a process that's known as the Reconquest. This happened in a period beginning with the 800s because Islam spread into Spain, took over most of it, except for a very extreme northern fringe, where there were a bunch of little kingdoms. One of them spoke the ancestor of Castilian. It was in a region called Castilla because there were castles, fortifications to buffer against further Muslim intrusions. That language then becomes the language of the nation of Spain, which is, of course, fast forwarding. Today, we know that languages rub together and they leave marks on each other. They leave vocabulary, they even leave some kinds of pronunciation. And for that, we can trace a kind of archaeology of all the contacts Spanish has had, all the way back to Latin. Greek, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Visigoths, and Arabs and Jews. This is what we're carrying around with us in the Spanish language, and this is something we can relate to because most of us, especially our generation, have gone to Western movies. And you've heard words like vamoose and pronto and bad hombre, right? You've heard things like arroyo and mesa, and you've also heard things like Mustang and rodeo and lariat. All of those come to the English language of the West, of our region, from Spanish. And so Spanish lives on in other languages, and other languages live on in Spanish. And the idea in this course is not that you should know Spanish before coming to it, but that you're interested in knowing more about this important language of the world. And, in fact, the United States is one of the most Spanish-speaking countries in the world. So it has a role in our lives here. All right, thank you very much.